for joining us. My name is Beth Schill, and I am one of the industry advisors at the Colleague Career Education Center. And we're working along with the GU Politics and Paula Pecorella to help bring you a series of events over the next 4 Fridays. And we're calling it Hoyas Helping Hoyas on Campaigns. And the whole point of this is to really help you all explore the world of campaigns and what a career in a campaign or in an active political organization, what it might look like. Right now, I think both Paula and I are seeing a lot of opportunities open up. Campaigns and related organizations are some of the organizations that are still actively hiring, and we intend to see that number grow as this presidential election year really gets into full swing. So joining us today, we have our first panelist, and we welcome Drew Rodriguez, and he is the Regional Operating Director at Biden for President, and he's a recent 2019 graduate. So while he was here on the Hilltop, he was involved in geopolitics and also was able to attend the 2016 Democratic National Convention. And he was telling me just before the call started that really right out of school, right after he graduated, he joined the Biden campaign and has been able to grow his career from there. So I won't go into more details. I'll leave that to our panelists, but we'll welcome Drew in a moment. How we intend for this to go is Drew's going to give a little bit of background about his career and what it's like working in a campaign. And then we'll really open it up to your questions. We'll ask that if you have any questions or any problems throughout, just use the chat function. And then when we get to the Q&A section, we'll call on you as we see the order of the questions come in. So with that, Drew, welcome to our virtual Hilltop. We're really glad that you could join us today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Beth and Paula. I'm really excited to try to answer any questions and talk about basically what I've been doing for the past year. And so, like Beth mentioned, I just graduated last May, and I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska. I went to a Jesuit high school, and so wanted to go to a Jesuit university and had always had this interest in politics and government. And so I was really fortunate in that my first year on the Hilltop, 2015, was the first year that the Institute of Politics was beginning on campus. Mo Alithi was just starting it, and there was a lot of buzz around it, and I just knew that I wanted to hop into the program in any way that I could. And so I think the first semester I was in one of the fellows groups. Mayor Alvin Brown from Jacksonville was my fellow for a semester, and we talked a lot about work that mayors do in localities during that semester. And then after that, since I was kind of like a guinea pig for the fellows program, I joined the student advisory board and kind of helped develop that program more, which was for my freshman and sophomore year. But probably the most rewarding and important maybe experience was going to the DNC as a student ambassador in 2016. And it's really unfortunate there isn't going to be a convention for either party in the sense of what it was like in the past, because it was a very captivating moment that I saw the National Democratic Party in a way that I hadn't before. And so that was very cool for me, but I still didn't know that I wanted to do campaign work. I knew that I was interested in politics, and I was studying, my major was in government, but I still hadn't really done much campaign work. So I did a consulting internship after my junior year. I had some good advice from the head of that consulting business. It's called Purple Strategies, if any of you may know about it. And the head of the firm is also from Omaha. And he told me that I had to go to Iowa. If you know where Omaha is, it's like 20 minutes away from the Iowa border. And obviously, everyone hypes up Iowa, the first caucuses. And it's just like the place you got to be, especially lining up with my graduation. So that was my plan. I moved back home, and I started volunteering right away. It was pretty hard to just get a job right away with the campaign, even though there were so many. At this point last year, there were probably, I don't know, 15 campaigns with some amount of staff in Iowa, which is crazy. And they really wanted to hire people first early in the summer with experience. And I didn't have a ton of experience on campaigns, or even volunteering with campaigns. Have any of you guys volunteered with campaigns in any capacity? Okay, a couple. So you probably know more than I did when I was first going into the job. And so I wanted to show that I was willing to do the work to volunteer. And I was in between the Biden and Kamala Harris campaign. And the Biden campaign told me, in a few months, there's going to be openings for jobs in Iowa. But we have an opening right away in Vegas. And I was like, never in my mind, I think I would be working in Nevada caucus, but I was really eager for a job. So I went for it, and just moved there last September, worked through the caucus. And if you have some campaign experience, you probably know this, but it is really not glamorous in any sense of the word. It's very tough work. You're bottom of the totem pole. You're knocking on doors, and then you come back to this office, and then you're tired, but you still have to make calls, and it's like that 7 days a week. But it's also really rewarding. You make connections with volunteers. You kind of create a family with your coworkers, who are also there with you every single day. And that's a really rewarding part of the organizing side. And I want to just share my screen really quickly, because I made a graph, not a graph, it's a slide, that kind of goes through, basically I made what the Biden campaign structure was in Nevada. But it's basically, this is the structure for any campaign in a national sense in other states. But I think it can help you understand what the different silos are of a campaign. So let me just try this really quick. Okay. Maybe I don't have the access. Can you see my screen?
No, I still just see you.
Okay, let me just try this for a minute. Okay.
I just promoted you to co-host, so that might change your ability to share screen.
Okay. I'm gonna try it for a minute, and I mean, if it doesn't work, I can try to open system security privacy. Oops. Okay, I don't think I can figure it out at the moment. but I can email this to Paula and Beth, and they can kind of send it around if you're interested. But basically what I was going to show and describe is that there's kind of different sections of a campaign where there's an organizing section who deals with volunteers, they're doing calling, they're doing knocking on doors, anything that's like public facing pretty much. Then there's communications, who they deal with, media, newspaper outlets, any type of journalism. Then there's digital, a digital sector, which does social media, email blasts, making different types of designs that you can share on any platform. And then there is political, and political deals with unions, constituency groups, elected officials. And what I was going to show with this graph is that the organizing component is actually larger than every other component combined. Those different silos are going to have directors, deputy directors, maybe, on a state level, especially for a primary, a handful of people. But organizing, we had a giant structure of, 20 organizers, then 4 regionals, which is what I am, and then a deputy, and then an organizing director. And so this is like the largest sector of the campaign, and it's also a great entry point because there's a lot of field organizers and a lot of work to be done. So I guess a great takeaway from knowing that is just that an organizer position is something that you can just get started into fairly easily. But as for my own career path, after Nevada, we finished the caucus. You work all month just for this moment. And the caucuses are really hard to organize. As you saw, Iowa was a disaster. You have to get volunteers who are trained, who know your talking points, who will convince their neighbors to vote the same way. And I mean, people didn't make up their minds for a week before. And then they decided, and then they don't want to get trained. And so it was mayhem. And so Nevada happened. Luckily, we got second, which was a win for us. We have a speech. Everyone's freaking out. After Nevada, they let a lot of staff go because we're tight on money. And then they basically called me and other staff and were like, okay, can you hop on a plane to South Carolina tonight? So I left all my stuff in Vegas. I went to South Carolina with 4 organizers from Iowa who I had no idea who they were. And then we did the same thing. We woke up, knock on doors in rural South Carolina for a week straight, which was a really great experience, seeing a part of the country that I had never been to or didn't really know well. But that's also a big turnaround moment for our campaign. We thought we were going to win South Carolina. As when I say we, I mean like, kind of us on the ground, the organizers. But the election night when we drove down to see Joe's speech in Charleston, the results were announced right away. We knew we won, but didn't know this margin. And it was like 30% or something like that, which basically propelled us onto Super Tuesday. You probably remember like all this, but Amy and Pete dropped out. They're, on stage with him. But the campaign work doesn't stop. So although we're celebrating in Charleston, then that night, I think I got a text and was like, hey, can you hop on a plane to Orlando tomorrow? And it's like, okay, now like, let's do this again. But I was really lucky at that time because when I got that call, they said I was getting a promotion to be a regional. And that was a really awesome experience to become a regional in Florida for the primary. And it was, I think, only maybe 6 to 8 out of 100 or so organizers received this promotion. And so it was a really big deal for me. So when I got to Florida, they're like, okay, we need you to open an office for 2 weeks in Tampa. So another new place I had no idea about, but I had a staff with me of organizers who were new to me. And for those 2 weeks, we had momentum on our side and built an office. And then kind of got the call that the 2 days before the primary, was when we got the call that we were going to be sent home to work from home for the time being for due to COVID. So that has basically been my trajectory for the past couple of months. And each month has been different. Right now, we're doing virtual events. I still have a team of organizers, and they host one every week. And then I just kind of manage that process. I make sure they're doing logistics correctly for, creating a Zoom link. Not necessarily just that, but like, the steps you have to take to host these. And we're in a transition process. So that whole group of organizing that I said was like the main part of the campaign, which is, let's say it's half the campaign still, they're going to be transitioned into state parties. So a lot of people will be doing work with the Florida Democratic Party, Pennsylvania. The battlegrounds are major players and institutions for this upcoming election. And so something that I may not have known at the time, or I guess didn't really think about, was maybe that the state parties basically are kind of an extension of the Biden campaign and have a lot of their staff now. And so if you're looking for jobs that are like, I want Biden campaign job, well, the campaign kind of, a large part of it's over because we got the nomination, we got that part of the job done. So now it just looks different in something called a coordinated campaign. So you can kind of think of these state parties as extensions of the Biden campaign. If any of you did work for Hillary, if you heard of what Hillary for America was, it was basically her campaign in conjunction with the state parties. So I think that pretty much sums up the work that I've done since graduation and where the campaign is going. But I'm happy to start taking any questions as well.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. One quick question I wanted to kind of touch on was, you had mentioned that there were these different points in time where a lot of people were sent home, but you were getting the text to go on to the next place, and then you got the call that you were going to be promoted to a regional organizer, and just how few people did that. At any point during that, did they mention why was it that you were chosen, or like what skills was it that you possessed, or perhaps characteristics that you possessed that they liked, that they then wanted to keep you on board?
Yeah, Beth, I think that's a really good question, because a lot of people, I think there's two things. A lot of people get really bogged down in how many calls you do and how many doors you knock, and they're like, why are metrics defining my work? And that's just one part of the job. And I did have really high numbers for the metrics, but I think I also kind of developed skills that I didn't necessarily know I had. And for me, I did a lot of digital work that it wasn't in my job description, but I wanted to try it out and it was getting good results. For example, one of the coolest things I did was I got an email from our digital director in Nevada, and she said, hey, if anyone wants to submit an Instagram story, we'll post it on Joe Biden's account. And so I took that as like a challenge of, I kind of made a whole list of stories and took over his account for a day. And it took a lot of time and effort. But like it ended up looking pretty good, and I didn't know if they were going to use it. And they did. And that kind of got my name in a lot of the headquarters people's heads, because they were like, oh, wow, did you see this? Like, this is a really cool Instagram takeover. And that happened on Twitter as well. And it doesn't have to be like that you become a digital like expert. I think that's just something that I saw that I could do. And so I explored it, even though it wasn't in my description.
Great, thank you. So at this point, we did want to go ahead and open it up to everybody. If you can please type your question in the chat function, and it will go to me or Paula. You can also submit it to us individually, and we'll just kind of go in order of us receiving it. So if you could do that, and then we'll call on you and unmute you. And at that point, you can ask your question. All right. Cool. All right. So let's see a couple people typing. I was going to say, Paula, go ahead if you.
Yeah, I'll call on some folks as we get.
Sorry about that.
Looks like we have a question that just came in from Jackson Edwards. Jackson, do you want to hop on camera and ask your question?
Yeah. Should we apply to multiple state parties when we're applying to jobs, or just one?
That's a really good question. I would apply to multiple. There's no harm in doing that. If you live in a battleground state or have a connection to a battleground state, that increases your chances, I think. But there's nothing will come wrong with sending all the applications to them.
All right, thanks.
Okay, next I have a question from Janice about tips on how to keep our volunteers motivated, especially with this entire virtual environment. So go ahead, Janice, and if you wanted to give a little background about that.
Perfect. So I want to thank you again, Drew, for taking the time to speak to us today. This has been so helpful. So my name is Janice, and I'm a rising junior in the college with a history major and a dual minor in government in French. So currently I'm the vice chair for Hoyas for Biden. So that's, Georgetown's little sector for trying to, campaign for the Biden presidency. So as you know, for the pandemic, we've really had to switch to a virtual environment. So now our phone banks, it's more like a Zoom conference where we all talk and then we all make calls, or it's mostly digital outreach. So my question to you was, in light of being virtual when we all can't be together anymore, do you have any tips on how to keep our volunteers motivated, how we stay focused, or really any general tips when the campaign work is mostly remote? So thank you.
Thank you, Janice. That's a really great question. And thanks for being a part of Hoyas for Biden. I think that's awesome. So this is something we've been trying to figure out as well. My organizers have been trying to do like retention for volunteers virtually. And so we've gotten some tips and tricks that I think work well. One is just kind of trying to create a schedule with the volunteers. Like, can you commit to Wednesday afternoon? And then you just kind of have to follow up before, follow up after, and pretend it's like you're in an office where you kind of debrief with them and you're like, so how did those calls go for you? Like, did you have any weird calls? Like, did you have any really great calls? And just kind of try to make it as normal as possible. And then another quick kind of not solution, but tip we've tried to do would be, we would host a virtual Zoom phone bank. And so it would look like this. and then everyone would mute themselves, and we'd have one of the organizers stay on speaker as the speaker. And then everyone's doing calls on the Zoom, you know, kind of doing their own thing. Maybe we set a goal of 20 calls. And if they have any question during the phone bank, they'll just unmute themselves and ask the person that's the speaker. So that's a good way to maybe retain them as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next we want to go to Lily McGrail.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm a rising senior in the college, majoring in government with minors in religion, ethics, world affairs, and medieval studies. And my question was, when you were moving from Las Vegas to South Carolina to Tampa, did your campaign strategy change depending on the location and the local community and culture there?
That's a really good question. So, okay, I'm going to answer this first for South Carolina, then for Florida. Because in South Carolina, no, we didn't, because we only had 5 days there. We weren't even dealing with volunteers, really. We were just knocking doors ourselves and trying to just be a presence there. But something that Bernie Sanders' campaign did really well there, if I were to be a campaign manager of sorts, he hired locally in South Carolina. And we did this to an extent for our political directors. You need a lot of political directors there, and in bigger cities, but he hired locally rural South Carolinians. And that's a very good strategy that we probably should have done, but we didn't really even have the money to have many rural organizers at the time. In Florida, our strategy was like completely, I remember I met with people who had been volunteers for every election cycle for the past 2 decades, and they had their own team, and they were basically, I mean, they ran the show, and I just kind of let them, and then kind of pulled the reins in when they were trying to do something that the campaign might not want them to do. But they were very involved with the culture of Tampa. There's a big Cuban community in Tampa, and a lot of them were Cuban Americans. And when I met with them, it was at like the same Cuban restaurant that they ate in every single day for like 15 years. And so I was just like, okay, I'm here to be, you know, the face of the Biden campaign, but this is your community. And if you've done this for 2 decades, like, let's just keep it going until the primary. But that's a really good question.
Thank you.
All right, let's go next to Rachel Friedman.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm a rising junior in the college, and I'm a government major. And I was wondering, now that the campaign has moved mostly digital and online, do you think there's different skills that staffers need that they wouldn't have needed as much when it was more door-to-door and in-person events?
Yeah, I mean, I think just being somewhat tech savvy and social media savvy in general is really useful. I kind of thought they would have the organizers take their Twitter handles and run with it, which hasn't been the case necessarily. But you do have to kind of, skills like, you just kind of have to be self-motivated to connect with people on the phone, whether it's texting them a lot and calling them. And like some people, they don't, you know, texting a lot isn't their thing, but it's just like, you just kind of have to constantly be in contact with people all the time, it's kind of an interesting skill. And I think it's one that's harder to develop, but it's very useful.
All right, Zachary Volpe, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a rising junior studying international politics at the School of Foreign Service. So basically, even though I'm studying international politics, I'm really into domestic politics as well. I've probably spent at least over 8 months on a campaign. And so my question for you is basically, I mean, this might be a bit of a hard one for you to answer too, because this is kind of a new thing for you too, but basically how should I and how would you use your past campaign experience to basically promote yourself or sell yourself in a new environment for campaigning, and how can you present those skills that you've learned in campaigning in the past to show people that you should be given more responsibility?
That's a really good question. So since you have campaign experience, and 8 months is, I mean, it's almost like a cycle. It is a cycle. You can apply directly for that next step. And I mean, I would encourage you to. And I think the things that people want to look for is, if you have this experience, what they want to know how well you did during that time, in terms of, do you know Van really well? Like, that's just like the basics of campaign. You have to know the vote builder Van format. Did you get a lot of volunteers and retain them? Like, if you can have numbers to back up the work you did, I think that will do you a lot of favors. So yeah, I think that's a good question.
Thank you.
All right, Miguel has a question next. Miguel, are you on mute?
Oh, there you go. Sorry about that. Hi, Drew. I'm a senior in the college, and majoring in government and minoring in history. And I just had a quick question, because I'm gonna be a field organizer for Biden, coming up in the next couple weeks, and I have a lot of questions how we're gonna be doing canvassing or going out onto the field and just engaging voters with the coronavirus pandemic. We've talked about digital things, but I just feel like it won't be the same way. I don't know. It's kind of an issue that we're all having here in Florida.
No, okay, that was my question. So Miguel, you're in Florida?
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Which area?
South Florida, Miami area.
Okay, cool. That's really gonna be a very important place to be. I think that is kind of the question right now, and I think it is going to depend state to state. From what I've heard, it sounds like a lot of state parties are going to open their offices but not have volunteers come in. So I have a feeling people will be doing canvassing, but you may not have as many volunteers or meetings in the actual office spaces, which kind of presents a new challenge. Like, if somebody says they'll canvass for you, but they can't come to your office, then I guess you just kind of have to like meet them outside, or I don't know. It's definitely like the question right now.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Next, we have Theodore. If you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
I'm a writing sophomore in the SFS. I'm actually from Singapore. I just want to ask you, how, with the rise of like a lot of social media and different like failure of polling, how do you track election results adequately in this period?
Well, I mean, I don't do any of the polling or stuff on the campaign side, but I do think there are like a couple Twitter accounts that you could follow that are like delve into that and are really good. I think, is it Dave Westerman who's always calls out elections like before the decision desk almost. And I like to see his input. Nate Silver has, he does the most polling more than anybody because he runs 538 site. And he's a really good Twitter follow. And these are just things that I do personally that they don't affect my work per se, but I think they affect how I think about my job. So I think that's a good first resource to look at.
And Dave Westerman, is he the one from North Dakota State University, or is that a different person?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe somebody on here knows. I'd have to, let me pull up his handle quick.
I was going to say you could cut and paste it in the group chat, and then everyone has a chance to see it.
Oh, and it's Dave Wasserman and his handle. Let me just type his handle in here.
And while you do that, next up we have Jack Hogan.
Oops.
Oops. No. Oh, I'll get it out there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so Jack, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Hi, Drew. Thanks for joining us today. So as you mentioned, campaign work is really hard. I volunteered last summer on the weekends in New Hampshire, and I really enjoyed talking with voters, but it's just hard work, as you were saying. And I imagine it's really hard now. And at least for me, what was keeping me going and motivated was talking with voters and that personal connection. And now you don't have that. And so I'm wondering what keeping you going and keeping you motivated on a day-to-day basis to make those calls, and not just obviously it's your job, but to keep making calls and keep hitting your numbers and go above and beyond.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, there were days in Nevada where it was really hard because each candidate kind of rose and fell each different week, and some days you would just get no one who was about Joe Biden, and you run into a lot of Trump people, even though you were talking to people that were Democrats before, and it was just it would just got really taxing. And that's where it was nice to go back to the office with your coworkers, and you could just vent and just be like, are you serious? This happened today. This was annoying. And that kind of commonality helped motivate me, and I think motivated others. Right now there isn't that so much, but we're also not doing direct voter contact. So we're not calling people right now and saying, are you voting for Trump? Are you voting for Biden? And I hope when we do start that, we'll be back in an office to kind of have that bond again with your coworkers.
All right, thank you. All right, so Jordan Steinberg, you're up next.
So thanks, Drew, for being here. I'm a rising junior in the college studying government. And so I'm currently working on a local district attorney's race, all virtually doing direct voter contact like you were just talking about. And the presidential race is on a whole different scale. But what's your strategy for approaching apathetic, undecided voters, especially digitally when it's a lot harder to make a connection?
I think the best strategy there might just kind of be, you don't want to be too pushy because digitally it just doesn't work, I don't think. A lot of people really don't like political calls in general. And so I think if you almost have to kill them with kindness, and you kind of get your points in here and there, but you aren't overt about it. And I think that will leave them thinking. I'm assuming since you're doing a local district attorney, the amount of people, your universe is pretty small. So, if you talk to a voter like that, but leave a good impression, let's say you talk to them once more before the election and you leave another one, then I think that's more impactful than trying to be really like gung-ho and pushy the first time you talk to them.
That's good advice. It makes me think of a question, and that is how, what experiences, given some of the skills that you've been naming, what experiences that you had at Georgetown, whether it was in a classroom or with, say, geopolitics or some of your other activities, do you think best help you prepare for getting involved in campaigning?
I'm trying to think outside of the Institute of Politics realm. And I think something, I'm just thinking about this now actually, that is pretty similar or taught me similar skills would be, I did some work with the Best Buddies program. My roommate was the president for 2 or 3 years, and I did some volunteer work every week with their general meetings. And then I would help him recruit. A lot of our friends ended up doing that. And that kind of, the skills I learned through that helped with the work I'm doing now, because a lot of it is maintaining relationships, whether that be with my best buddy for the year or their parents or my friends who also volunteered. And so it's a good skill to have, like, that relationship building kind of, skill.
All right, it looks like we got another question from Timothy Carroll.
You see me?
Yep.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me. I just wanted to ask if getting involved with Hoyas for Biden, if we could reach out to Janice over email. Thank you. Or if there was another person to get in touch with.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. I'm going to write my email right down here. Should I send it to Drew Rodriguez, or should I do it Paula or Elizabeth? Oh wait, my computer just like froze up. I have really bad Wi-Fi today, guys. I'm sorry.
All right, you should be able to send it to everyone now.
Okay.
If you wanted to do that.
Thank you.
And while you're doing that, does anybody have any other questions to ask of Drew? I know I was curious to see too, you had mentioned very briefly that when you started, Drew, you were thinking like you were kind of between Biden and Harris. And I get this question a lot when students come to chat with me about, I'll say who to end up campaigning for. How did you end up picking? Like what did you look for, or did you go with who you thought you would win versus, say, who inspired you the most?
So I think you have to be campaigning for a candidate that you believe in, or else the job is just too hard. And so I liked both of them for different reasons. And I think the people on the Biden campaign that I talked with and interviewed and volunteered with, they had a really strong impact on me, and they were really good representatives of Joe Biden. Because without any talking to either campaign, I think I was leaning towards Kamala, and really liked her messaging. But after dealing with the representatives of the Biden campaign, they really sold me on him as a candidate and as someone I could get behind and work for. So going into a campaign job based on like who you think might win is probably not a good idea, because it probably won't, inspire you to work hard every day. So, and everyone goes up and down, and it's like the polling now, I don't pay any mind to. You just can't, or else you just kind of get lost in it, I think.
I had one question for you, Drew. We've had a lot of students reach out who are interested in going to work on a campaign now that they've graduated and the summer's coming up. We recently saw the Joe Biden summer internships were circulated to our students. So I was just wondering what advice you have for recent grads, students who are just graduating now and looking to get their first job on a campaign.
So something that I did that I think can work for anybody is we're doing these virtual events. I'm sure the Hoyas for Biden have co-hosted some of these events, and making some of these calls, and just get in contact with an organizer. You're able to on joebiden.com. You can email me directly, and I'll put my email in, and just kind of see how you can get involved right now. And I think that will that'll be really helpful for anyone looking to work on the campaign.
So to your earlier point, starting as a volunteer is definitely a good segue in, it sounds like.
Yeah, definitely.
Kind of along those lines, I know it is a presidential election year, but to what extent are you involved at all in any of the down ballot races? Like, do you guys have folks from your campaign who work at the state and local levels for the Democratic Party? Or if students are interested, is that an option as well?
Yeah, so when a lot of the organizing staff gets put into the fold of the state parties, it depends on the state, but for the battleground states in particular, their main priority is going to be getting Joe Biden elected. But if they're working in a district that can also be flipped, or that recently flipped and they need to defend, a lot of effort is going to be put into those as well. If we use Omaha for an example, which is Nebraska's a strange state because we're the only state other than Maine that our electoral votes split. So Omaha could vote for Joe Biden in the Electoral College, but we also have a Democratic congresswoman or nominee for Congress who is likely to flip the seat. So the state party will probably do both, like 50-50.
Okay, thank you. Before we wrap up, does anybody have any last questions? Okay. Drew, any final words of wisdom or advice for everyone who's on the call today?
I think I had a few takeaways that may be helpful as you're looking at, your possible career prospects. The first is there is no right or wrong time to get involved in a campaign. If you go work for a consulting firm or a government entity for a year and then want to hop into campaigns, that only helps you. You have experience doing other things. You can get into all facets of the campaign. So you can really get involved at any time. And then also I would just say, get involved in any capacity you can. And, it matters where you're from locally, in the sense that like every local election I think is important. So, if you can volunteer, do 20 calls a week even that does make a difference, and it is a good way to get involved too. So I think that's some parting words or words of wisdom that I'd give for you.
Wonderful, thanks. And also don't forget to register, folks. I know both Paula and I have a link to register to vote in our email signature, so that's critical as well.
I love that. That's a good idea.
Well, especially in college, I know it can get confusing depending on where you live and where you want to be registered. So, all right. Well, Drew, thank you again for your time today. We really appreciate it. And for everybody who's on, we will be emailing out afterwards the file that Drew was talking about, and we apologize, Drew, for the technical difficulties. This is a learning process still for many of us. So thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today. And if anybody has any questions, or if you folks on the line want to talk more about careers, both Paula and I are happy to chat with you and help put together some plans for how you might want to plan out getting involved in campaigns, whether it's this summer or sometime in the future. So we're here to help. We're here all summer, even though campus is closed, we are not. So with that, we'll go ahead and let everybody go. Drew, thank you again so much. Take care,
thank
everyone.
you, Beth and Paula. If anyone wants to email me, please do.
Yep. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
See ya.
Bye.